Ultra-conservative Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is no stranger to scandal. Last year, in the midst of the January 6th committee's investigation, we learned that his wife, Ginny, exchanged dozens of text messages with Trump's chief of staff in her attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Despite the obvious conflict of interest, Clarence Thomas refused to recuse himself from cases relating to the election or to January 6th. This year, ProPublica broke a series of reports exposing an undisclosed relationship the justice maintained with a billionaire Republican donor named Harlan Crow. Crow took Thomas on several all-expenses-paid luxurious vacations worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He paid for his grandnephew's private school tuition as well. He even purchased the justice's mother's home. Justice Thomas did not disclose any of those lavish gifts. The Washington Post recently reported that Federalist Society co-chairman Leonard Leo directed tens of thousands of dollars of business to the firm of Thomas's wife, Ginny, while keeping her name off the billing paperwork. And now, the New York Times has just published the latest story of Thomas's association with an exclusive organization called the Horatio Alger Association, where Clarence Thomas, quote, moved into the inner circle, a cluster of extraordinarily wealthy, largely conservative members who lionized him and all that he had achieved. He has granted it unusual access to the Supreme Court, where every year he presides over the group's signature event, a ceremony in the courtroom at which he places Horatio Alger medals around the necks of new lifetime members. One entrepreneur called it the closest thing to being knighted in the United States. His friendships forged through Horatio Alger have brought him proximity to a lifestyle of unimaginable material privilege. Over the years, his Horatio Alger friends have welcomed him at their vacation retreats, arranged VIP access to sporting events, and invited him to their lavish parties. Joining me now is one of the reporters who broke this story, Steve Etter, investigative reporter for the New York Times. Steve, this is another blockbuster piece about Clarence Thomas. And in it, it's pretty fair to say Clarence Thomas's relationship with this organization is a significant and meaningful one. How specifically has Thomas benefited from the connections and the friendships he's forged with not only fellow members, but also with other Horatio Alger friends?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's an important piece, I think, to look at this aspect of Justice Thomas's career. I think when you look at the Horatio Alger Association, it is this group. It kind of does two things. There's a scholarship aspect to it that involves kids and giving away money, but there's also a network there of powerful, of wealthy people. And Clarence Thomas, for a long time, has been very much, at the center of this organization in certain ways, and befriended people, who are in and around this organization, kind of at the core of it. And, that has led to various benefits for him as parts of these friendships. There's trips to Florida, there's ranch visits in Montana, lavish birthday parties, access to sporting events, and things of that nature that you see when you start to trace through these relationships.
Steve, I mean, let's be frank. Who wouldn't want to rub elbows with Oprah Winfrey and Denzel Washington? Before tonight's show, I actually went to the membership directory for the Horatio Alger organization because, look, it's not just super conservative people and Republicans. I mean, it's everybody, right, that really meets the requirements to join this organization. But let me be clear. There are titans of industry in this organization, from aerospace to tech, to energy and electronics. I mean, it's inevitable that cases involving these areas might end up before SCOTUS. But, Steve, can you really police something if it seems to be nothing more than just a club or organization membership?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the issues here as it relates to disclosure and what's disclosed and what's not disclosed. And that's been a big theme, in the ethics discussion around the Supreme Court. And, one of the reasons that this caught our eye are the types of relationships, the business relationships, the range of industries that come into play here. And so, it comes down to, in some ways, a disclosure question and a transparency issue, and what actually is disclosed. And in a lot of these cases, many of the cases that we noted, it wasn't disclosed.
You report that Justice Thomas received benefits, quote, from a broader cohort of wealthy and powerful friends. They've included major donors to conservative causes with broad policy and political interests and much at stake in Supreme Court decisions, even if they were not directly involved in the cases. Is there any way, Steve, to be able to quantify the types of benefits that Clarence Thomas has received over the years?
Well, based on the disclosures alone that he makes, which are required annual disclosures that federal judges make, there's what's disclosed. You'll see teaching, you'll see speeches, you'll see things of that nature. I think what we're running into here is these other kinds of benefits and hospitality that comes into play, which is very hard to add up. And through some of the reporting, our reporting, and other reporting, we've begun to be able to piece together some of the other aspects of this.
Steve, what really strikes me about this is you kind of can't begrudge somebody for being able to have, special tickets to suites for the Cowboys. I mean, he's friends with Jerry Jones, who's a member of the organization. He was friends with Wayne Huizenga, who was a Dolphins fan. I mean, let's put aside the fact that Clarence Thomas says he's a Cowboys and a Dolphins fan at the same time, which kind of blows my mind in and of itself. I mean, you can't begrudge somebody from being able to rub elbows and to be able to be a part of this particular rarefied air. But in and of itself, the fact that he has access to bend ears, but vice versa, that these people have the ability to bend his ear, that's truly the issue here. So do you think it comes to the point where we've talked about reforms, we've talked about SCOTUS, we've talked about making it better, tighter, and more ethical? Do you think that's exactly why this type of piece you've written is necessary for the American public to know?
Well, I think it's about transparency and disclosure, and that's kind of at the root of just sort of what we're doing as journalists. But this is a case too where one of our big takeaways is looking at the access that Justice Thomas gave this organization. They not just to the Supreme Court, but to the courtroom itself to hold their annual inauguration of these members. This very solemn ceremony that's kind of at the heart of this. So there's a lot that goes into this and a lot to consider. To think about the different ramifications and disclosures and transparency around it.
Steve Eater, I appreciate you being here and for giving us this blockbuster reporting. It's really good. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.